Trump or Biden? That's the decision facing the United States. But never mind what Americans think. Who does America's adversaries want to see in the White House? I'm Ali Aslan, and today on The Newsmakers, we ask the world to weigh in on the US presidential election. There's a belief in scientific circles that when a butterfly flaps its wings, it can trigger a tornado on the other side of the globe. On November the 3rd, the result of the US election could have a similar effect. World leaders will be watching the race closely as American voters pick a president whose foreign policies will have an impact on billions of lives. This year, in everything from trade and tariffs to arms sales and oil, the stakes have never seemed higher. In a moment, we'll ask if Beijing backs Biden and if Putin still prefers Trump. But first, Adam Platz reports on how Washington is worried some foreign powers may turn their political preference into interference.
Early voting is underway for November's presidential election, which Democrats and Republicans alike are describing as the most important in generations. The outcome will affect not just the US, but countries far and wide, including Washington's most powerful foes. The director of the US National Counterintelligence and Security Center, William Ivanina, has published its assessment of the threat of electoral interference, primarily from Russia, China, and Iran. And the FBI director has also spoken publicly about foreign attempts to meddle in the election.
An effort to both sow divisiveness and discord, and I think the intelligence community has assessed this publicly, primarily to denigrate Vice President Biden and what the Russians see as kind of an anti-Russian establishment. That's essentially what we're seeing in 2020.
The consensus in US intelligence is that Russia favors Donald Trump, but China sees him as unstable and would prefer Democratic challenger Joe Biden. For Iran's part, the National Counterintelligence and Security Center says it seeks to divide the US and undermine its electoral institutions. Technology companies have also warned of election-related cyber attacks from all three countries, and as a result, have removed millions of fake accounts located in their territories. Washington has said it will use both sanctions and rewards for informants to deter election-related online interference.
Speaking of Russia and other malign actors, the State Department's Rewards for Justice program is offering a reward of up to $10 million for information leading to the identification or location of any person who, acting at the direction or under the control of a foreign government, interferes with U.S. elections by engaging in certain criminal cyber activities.
In August, a Senate Intelligence Committee concluded that in 2016, President Vladimir Putin personally directed Russian hacks so as to leak damaging information about Trump's then rival, Hillary Clinton. Could 2020 see a rerun of this foreign interference? And if Trump loses the election, might he cry foul? This time, perhaps blaming interference from his trade war rival, China. Adam Platz, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Moscow is Andrey Kortunov. He's the Director General of the Russian International Affairs Council. In Beijing is the Vice President of the Center for China and Globalization, Victor Gao. And in Iran's capital, Mohammad Marandi is a professor at Tehran University and a political analyst. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Andrey, the U.S. intelligence agencies concluded in 2016 that Russian interference helped influence the 2016 election and get Donald Trump elected. Now, of course, he's up for re-election. Is Moscow still rooting for him?
Well, I'm not an advisor to President Putin, but if I were to advise him, I would ask him to look at the track record of the U.S.-Russian relations during the Trump administration. The elections, in my opinion, the relations have not got any better, but actually they got much worse. So I see no point in supporting Mr. Trump, given his track record.
So you're saying that Joe Biden, in that sense, could not do more detriment and harm to Russian-U.S. relations as we've seen the past 4 years. Did I understand you correctly?
Well, I think that we should dig deeper into details. For example, if you take arms control, I assume that the Biden administration might be more interested in arms control. Of course, if you take human rights, I think Biden is likely to take a tough approach to this issue. Biden might take a soft approach to Iran, which is clearly in Russia's interests, but at the same time, he might support more Ukraine, which is not in Russia's interests. Therefore, it's a mixed bag, and I think that each of the candidates has its advantages and disadvantages as far as the Kremlin is concerned.
Victor, Donald Trump prides himself on being tough on Russia. On China, I'm sorry, saying that he's very tough on Beijing, singled out China as the #1 factor for the pandemic, calls it the Wuhan virus. Is it safe to assume that Beijing is yearning for a change in the White House?
Well, first of all, the U.S. presidential election should be purely a U.S. domestic affair, and foreign countries, including China, should not have a say in that. We are very eager observers and witnesses to this very important presidential election. That's very important. The second point is that whoever who becomes the next U.S. president, be it Donald Trump or Joe Biden, China will need to deal with him as he is, whether he is Joe Biden or Trump. It doesn't matter that much. China will deal with the presidency as it is now. Being tough or not on China is one thing, but I think the real question is whether being tough on China will serve the fundamental interest of the American people. As we can see, being tough on China by President Donald Trump doesn't serve the fundamental interest of the American farmers or the American manufacturers. They actually hurt the American people's fundamental interest. Therefore, I hope the next president of the United States will be more balanced in its view about China, in his dealing with China, bearing in mind the fundamental interest of the American people. That's the real litmus test.
Mohammed, China is one country that Donald Trump always prides himself on being tough on, but Iran is also a country that he likes to bang up against. Certainly, if you look at this track record throughout the past 4 years, he has rescinded from the Iran nuclear deal, which Obama and his Secretary of State Kerry put forth, and always has been a strong advocate of sanctions against Iran. Again, the question, is Tehran hoping for a President Biden come November 3rd?
Well, I think from what I've already heard from your very good guests, I can conclude that the problem really lies in the United States. We know that in 2016, Hillary Clinton lost because she was corrupt, and so was the DNC. And instead of blaming themselves, they blame Russia, whereas we know that WikiLeaks and Assange, who is a political prisoner right now in London, he has said that he did not receive his information from Moscow. So instead of looking inside the country, the Democrats are looking for a problem outside the country. The same is true with China. China has problems with Trump and with the United States in general, but now Trump wants to use China, just like the Democrats use Russia. In the case of Iran, they're playing it both ways, that Iran wants to divide the country. But again, that shows that the problem is inside the country. The United States seems to have lost its self-confidence when a country like Iran can manipulate U.S. elections and create divisions inside the country. What does that say about the state of affairs inside the United States? So I really think that the problem does not have anything to do really with China, Russia, or Iran, but it is the very deep divisions that have been created in the United States because of liberal capitalism and because of the hatred that now exists among the political establishment and the elites in the United States. And Trump is partially responsible for that, but he's also the result of it as well.
Nonetheless, of course, Andrey, the director of U.S. counterintelligence, William Ivanina, we heard him in the package, leading up to this discussion is saying that foreign powers are looking to sway the U.S. vote, looking to influence the election. And he has singled out the three countries, China, Russia, and Iran, for seeking to influence the U.S. election. As a matter of fact, the FBI Director Christopher Wray says since 2016, Russia has never stopped meddling in U.S. politics and is currently working to undermine the Biden candidacy. What do you make of his statements?
Well, I think that one of the problems here is that the notion, the definition of interference is very ambiguous and very vague. If you look into U.S. sources, how they define interference, it's very difficult to figure out what they really mean. For example, if you have media coverage, which they consider to be biased, or whether you have social networks which are not necessarily pro-Biden or pro-Trump, does it really mean interference? It's hard to tell.
I think they're primarily speaking of spreading disinformation. I think that's really what is being talked about here.
Spread information?
Disinformation, fake news on social media.
Well, then you should define what disinformation means and how you distinguish information, disinformation, and opinion. You know, I get a lot of fake information from the United States regarding the Russian political system. And definitely Russia can also accuse the United States of interfering in its domestic affairs. Any country can do it because you can find on the internet practically everything. Tons of fake news are uploaded in internet every day from various sources. So it's hard really to respond to these claims if they're not specific.
Victor, the FBI director says since 2016, Russia has never stopped meddling. But interestingly enough, Attorney General William Barr says this year it's really China rather than Russia that poses the main threat this year. China prefers that Donald Trump does not win re-election and is spreading disinformation as well. Quite some accusation.
Yes, indeed. I think for the American political leaders to bark at China is really barking at the wrong tree. As I emphasized, China will need to deal with whichever candidate who eventually becomes the next president.
Absolutely, but what do you make of these accusations directed towards China by Attorney General William Barr and Counterintelligence Chief William Evanina? They're singling out Russia, China, and Tehran in particular.
I thought that the United States is a country of rule of law and there is due process. If they accuse someone or accuse China as a country, come up with real evidence and go through due process, you cannot just accuse someone and use that accusation as if that's the end of the story or that's the totality of the truth. The world doesn't work like that. And for China, why should we interfere with the presidential election in the United States? It's not in China's interest. And by the end of the day, we need to deal with whichever person who comes into the White House, whether he is anti-China, more objective of China, or whether he's really wanting to tear the United States into pieces. Whichever person becomes the next president, we just need to deal with him as he is.
Certainly, no doubt about that. That goes for all countries, not just the three. 200 plus countries will have to deal with the new president come November 3rd. But Mohammed, again, Iran is also, Evanina is saying Iran is trying to undermine Donald Trump and Donald Trump's re-election campaign by spreading this information. Again, these are accusations that are made not just by an average Joe on the street, but by the director of U.S. counterintelligence. It has to be taken serious, no? Mohammed?
Well, I thought Iran was trying to divide the country, so that sort of runs inconsistent with the previous, with what you just said. I think we have to really look at it from a different perspective. First of all, the United States has been interfering, and its allies, of course, have been interfering in Iranian affairs for decades. Forget the coup before the revolution and bringing the Shah to power, supporting his dictatorship. Forget the fact that they supported Saddam Hussein and gave him chemical weapons, and the sanctions and the Persian language media that they've created. They've created tens of TV channels and websites and so on against Iran, and they've constantly been interfering in Iran's internal affairs. And the same is true with Russia and China. So I don't think the Americans really are in a position to complain about anything when it comes to their own elections. But also I would like to add that we've been this is itself, I think, fake news when an American senior intelligence official, and often these unnamed officials, those are the worst, when they make these claims and accusations, and the American media and much of the European media immediately assumes it's correct. Well, that's exactly how the Americans invaded Iraq. They lied from top to bottom about chemical weapons, Saddam Hussein's link to al-Qaeda. The United States is not a credible regime. The intelligence organizations in the United States have zero credibility. So why should we take them seriously now? I mean, Iran,
except this is, of course,
the
not
United
an
States is a country of
unnamed, anonymous,
320
mysterious
maybe
source.
million people.
I mean, this is the director of the U.S. counterintelligence. Is he making stuff up? Why would he make stuff up?
True, but ultimately, actually it is he and people like him who lied about Iraq, and it is people like him who send these unnamed officials here and there to feed the media with fake news. So they're not in a position to talk about Iran, or they're not in a position to. The problem is that the United States has serious problems. The country is in economic decline. It's heading for a major depression, which could be worse than 1929. The country is deeply divided. Their fight against the coronavirus has been catastrophic, and they've antagonized country after country. And in fact, they're bringing the three major powers, China, Russia, and Iran being the most powerful country in West Asia, China being a global economic power, and
Right.
Russia being the largest country in the world. The United States is helping bring these countries together by this ridiculous behavior that they're showing.
Andrey, I mean, it is no crime or sin to have a preference, certainly not when it comes to the next U.S. presidents, absolutely legitimate. So you have your sources in the government circles in Moscow. You're talking to the people on the street. By and large, what do people say in Russia? Are they vying for a change? Are they hoping for a change in the White House? Or do they want to keep Donald Trump in the White House for another 4 years?
Well, let me just say that here you have a Russian, Chinese, and an Iranian. And these three countries are accused in a kind of international conspiracy to interfere into U.S. Elections. But the assumption is that Russia supports Trump while China and Iran allegedly support Biden. It makes very little sense in terms of an international conspiracy. But putting this aside, let me say that, in my view, Trump is more liked in the streets of Moscow because he is witty, he is funny, he always has something. If you take the establishment, probably they would still prefer Biden because they hope for a more consistent U.S. policy and more predictable foreign policy of the United States, which might benefit Russia in the end of the day.
So more predictability with Biden then, even though the entertainment factor, if I understand you correctly, is appreciated to a certain extent by Russians on the street. Victor, again though, the U.S.-China relations are not at their best at this particular point. Certainly a lot of fields of conflict and potential for conflict, not just currently, but in the days, months, and potentially years ahead. These are two superpowers vying for a place at the top. What are your sources telling you, not just in government circles, but again on the street? Who are the people hoping to lead the United States, understanding very well your point that this is, of course, first and foremost, a domestic decision for Americans to make?
Thank you. Allow me to make several points. One is that China-U.S. relations have never been as bad as it is today for the past 41 years. This is very much unfortunate. This is very much because there are politicians in Washington who have really poisoned China-U.S. relations. I'm confident about China-U.S. relations for the medium and longer term. And because China is not an enemy of the United States, and the Chinese people should not be viewed as enemies of the American people. Secondly, talking about the preference, allow me to emphasize, I would say the next president of the United States should be a person of decency, of honesty, of integrity, of great ability to rally the American people behind him, because otherwise, the president, if he has the opposite qualities, will tear the America into pieces, will really wreak havoc in the world, and will create all kinds of anxieties in countries big or small throughout the country. That will be very bad for the American people. It will be bad for the United States as a country. It will be bad for the world. So I do hope the next president of the United States after this presidential election will be a person of honesty, whom you can deal with it, and you would love to have him as your neighbor, as your friend, as your trustee, as your associate. You cannot have a president of the United States whom nobody wants to trust. Nobody wants to entrust him with anything important. So, that will be really turning the United States into a banana republic.
Pleading very much for a fresh start, a restart of U.S.-China relations. We have to see whether that's possible with the re-election of Donald Trump. Mohammed, Persians, Iranians would be forgiven for rooting for Joe Biden. At the end of the day, Donald Trump came in with a very tough stance on Iran and dismembered a deal that took many months and years, if not years, in the making, the Iran nuclear deal. Iran-Western relations were just on the mend, were on the way up, trying to repair broken relationships of the previous decades. Here comes this president who completely dissolves this and insists on sanctions being imposed on Iran. Clearly, not much love lost for Trump on the streets of Tehran, I assume.
Yes, I think that's absolutely correct. The people on the streets obviously hate Trump, especially because he has imposed an embargo trying to make ordinary people in Iran suffer. I have a PhD student right now. Her small child is dying because of cancer, and they've had problems finding the medicine. So the United States is attempting to kill as many people as possible in Iran. And in addition, of course, Trump murdered General Soleimani and Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes, the Iraqi hero. These are the two people who led the fight against ISIS, the same ISIS that the United States and its allies helped to create, ISIS and al-Qaeda in this part of the world. So the hatred for Trump is universal in Iran. However, I think among policymakers it's more ambiguous. There are some who think that Biden would be better because Trump has obviously gone way too far, and that Biden may tone things down a bit. And there are others who think that Trump would actually be preferable because the way in which he's creating divisions in the United States, and this decline is happening pretty rapidly. And actually the accusations that are being made against Iran, Russia, and China have to do with this decline and the psychology of the American political establishment, where they simply can't deal with the facts on the ground, that through liberalism and through capitalism, they've destroyed the middle class and they've driven the economy into the ground. Yep. And they simply, because they think that their country is exceptional and somehow different from the rest of the world, they can't come to the recognition that they are indeed to be blamed for this state of affairs, and they are to be blamed for the creation of Trump. Biden and the likes of Biden brought Trump to power. And I think until the U.S. political establishment can't see that, there's no hope for change in the United States.
Well, certainly deep divisions in the country, that's for sure, in the United States, which will culminate in the election. Andrey, as we are winding down, I do want to get make use of your political instinct and look into your crystal ball there. How do you think this is going to play out on November 3rd? What do you think? What's going to happen? Who will succeed? Andrey, I'm not sure if you heard the question.
Oh, sorry, I think I got interrupted. Can you repeat it?
No worries. Just wanted to get your quick take and guess about what's going to take place on November 3rd. Who do you think will be the next president of the United States?
Well, I think that we will not know it on November 4th. It will take a long time. I can imagine that there'll be a very complicated legal procedure. But if I were to bet my money, I would probably bet it on Biden.
On Biden. Victor, Mohammed, just very quickly, throw out a name.
This is Victor. I think the United States will be damned if Trump wins, and the United States will be damned if Trump loses. Why? Because if he wins, Trump will be completely unhinged and unrestrained, and he will really hunt down enemies at home or abroad, for example, doing tremendous amount of damage to the fundamental interests of the American people.
Right.
If he loses, he will refuse to acknowledge defeat, and he will push the United States in one of the worst constitutional crises. Let's brace up for whatever that's coming after November the 3rd.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. Mohammed, I think I know your answer right there. I think you provided it already in the context. Andrey Kortunov, Victor Gao, and Mohammad Marandi, thank you so much for joining us and providing the view, international view on the upcoming US election. Thank you out there for watching, and hope to see you again next time for a new edition of Newsmakers.